I don't feel like I should have to deny or just cancel out a whole facet of what has shaped my soul. Just because you don't have an imagination big enough to take me as a legitimate human being, it feels like a crisis of imagination. And our imagination for each other's world is really profoundly shaped by what people consume in media and social media. And yeah, it is so crazy how loud the stuff about Mormonism is.
We are having a moment where I feel like we're being presented with some potentially more palatable options, especially of Mormon women. We see something like Ballerina Farm, and it's like, here's an option: be an absolute domestic goddess and like run a household that would make anybody in any culture, any religion jealous. And then there's also something like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, which is like almost leave. Don't do the uncool parts of the church stuff, and definitely be so beautiful and sexy. And I'm like, these are not great options for women. So I would love to see representations that made people feel like, oh, I saw that thing, and maybe you're that kind of Mormon. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I'm currently not able to point to a thing and say, I'm like that kind of Mormon.
And welcome to the Soloists / Mormons in Media. Today, we have two podcasts going on a date, a first date. Maybe there will be a second date. We'll see.
Hope so.
But yeah, Mallory and I are joined by our friend Rebbie Brassfield. Maybe we could introduce each other's podcasts for our different audiences, and then we can kind of talk about what the overlap would be. And then we're going to be talking about Twilight today and what that has to do with both of our separate projects. So, Rebbie, tell us what led you to start the Mormons in Media project.
Yeah, so I have run, it started as an Instagram account with one of my dear friends who we've done a lot of writing together. We met in the YSA ward in LA because we were visiting teaching companions. Tale as old as time. And she's like a screenwriter. She's a voracious reader. We started texting each other anytime we would see a Mormon reference in something we were reading or watching. And it was happening frequently enough that we were just like, what is going on here? It was almost like it was in everything we were reading or watching, but it was always just a throwaway joke, like never an in-depth examination or representation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which I'm trying to say more. But so we just like, what is this? We started making a list of references, and we had so many, we're like, we have to do something with this. So we started an Instagram account where essentially we post clips from anything: books, podcasts, music, movies, TV shows, all kinds of mainstream media that feature Mormons. So we're not even feature, but that reference it in any way. So we've been doing it for about 6 years, I want to say, and it's been just like a really small but super engaged community that is so fun, and people are so smart and thoughtful, and I have wanted to do a podcast for forever and not had the time, and I still don't really have the time, but I'm trying to do it. So it's great. It's fun. I just feel like I get in a lot of like really interesting conversations with people over DMs, and that's usually where the most fun happens, right? So I felt like in a podcast forum, I'm getting to explore some of the topics we touch on Instagram in a little bit more depth. So yeah, that's what we do. We essentially just cover media representation of Mormons, and it is only increasing, it was kind of something I did not expect when we started this, but here we are.
Yeah, that's crazy.
In the heretic era.
Whew. Yeah, so much to be said about that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, honestly. There's a lot out there. There needs to be more. Needs to be more.
And it's wild. So someone sent me today, the Instagram account Betches does like a meme of the year.
Yeah.
And we have like 4 or 5 entries. It's like Real Housewives, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. Oh, there's obviously a Hannah Neeleman one. Like it just was wild to see that almost every category there was a, and we're very loose, like big tent with the term Mormon. It's very like, if you are involved in any way, I like to include people in, as long as they want to be included. So we'll take both Whitneys from Housewives and Secret Lives.
Love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. We always kind of like to say, like, we grew up singing the same primary songs. Like
Mhm.
I love that.
we're a part of the same culture. We have a lot of the same influences and references. We make sense of the world in similar ways. It doesn't, what matters is that we can speak at least certain parts of this language together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amen.
And I guess just to like loop in your audience on what our project is. So, The Soloist is a podcast that's trying to uh, think about singleness, especially from a faith based perspective. And we mean that both in the way of like, as people who grew up in a very family and marriage centric culture, what is it like being single? But also in the sense of like, um, what does it really look like for a place that, to be honest, I think carries a lot of shame and fear? Like, what does it take to show up and translate faith into this situation? And so, yeah, we have conversations about the way that we think about like relationships and dating and what family means. But Rebbie, I seriously think that everything you're doing is so profound. Um, about like
Thank you. You're so nice.
I no, I really do. Or just in the sense of like increasingly, I feel like a lot of what's driving people to make the decisions they're making around religion is less like I mean, sure, there's always going to be like specific theological or historical questions, but honestly, I think a lot of it is because being a Mormon makes you a total alien today. And I just feel like the stuff that you're getting at hits at like my real experience in the way nothing else does, to be honest. So anyway, I'm a big fan. I think it's very
Thank
important to
you.
address, and everyone should be thinking about it more.
Thanks. You're so nice. And I guess just to why I am passionate about it. I mean, my career is in advertising, and I'm always thinking about like I feel very passionate about branding and messaging and about what a big impact that has on any organization. And the church, like it or not, is an organization. And I've done some work with, church branding, and I guess I've seen how many good people are trying to do good things with it, but how many people are just not seeing it because we're not in the places that we need to be for more people to be seeing it. I also want to add, just to compliment you guys, just how important I think what you are doing is. I don't know if we've talked about this. Have I told you guys how in my 20s I had a blog called Normans? This was like,
Yeah, I used to
Oh,
follow
fun.
it.
okay, okay, so, and the reason I started that was because I was single, living in LA, working, and that was in like the Mormon mommy blogger moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was seeing out there as like, this is what people know. And I guess nothing's changed, but
True.
I was like, this is not my story. And so the purpose it was like 5 or 6 young single members of the church who were living and working in different cities across the country and just trying to normalize it, right? Because I grew up in Provo. I went to BYU. I moved to LA to work in advertising and felt like an alien, right?
Yeah.
Of all aliens. Like, and I think it really can be so like, I think clearly I've always had a sore or insecure spot about it because I keep trying to show how normal we can be in all these different creative projects. Um, but I just think that like when I started Mormons in Media, I was hoping for that one accurate representation. And now I want more of them. And a big one is single people. And it's insane to me that even in the church, you're starting to see it barely be acknowledged in conference talks or whatever. I had a tiny bit of that pain of being single longer than I thought I would. And I just think it's so real and so painful for so many people, and we have to change it. So anyway, sorry, this is getting long before we've even started,
All
but
good.
Oh no, this is
I
great.
love what you guys are doing,
Yeah.
and it's like couldn't come soon enough. So
Rebbie, I could not agree with you more about the more and varied types of representation. I'm very interested in what you're doing as well, and I'm a huge fan and have been loving following the Instagram because I've been interested in this forever. I started clocking Mormon references when I was like a teenager, falling in love with TV and comedy, and noticing that we were always just a joke. And having
always.
cognitive dissonance about that. Like, yeah, I have a respectful life full of dignity, but also the whole world thinks of my people as creepy or weird or funny. And how you process that as like that's the way you're raised. And we're told that being peculiar is okay, but it feels so bad for so much of our lives. So
Yeah.
when I moved out here after my Utah chapter, I was I had almost no interest in making anything about Mormons. I never really did. I was just like, no, I want to be one of those like classic tales of somebody who finds success in their area of interest, and then people find out they're Mormon afterward, and they're like, huh, who knew? Maybe there's a normal Mormon out there. But as I started going to meetings out here, I found that I couldn't separate myself from Mormonism all that easily. People would ask me where I lived before this, and I would say Utah. Where did I go to school? What network did I make the sketch comedy show on? And it was like, oh, suddenly I'm talking about my religion in 2 minutes flat. And I'm not even pitching anything about Mormons, but here we are. And maybe I'm not going to get another meeting because this is just too weird. Or maybe it's very memorable. But at the time, I started out feeling panicked and shameful about it. And then one day I just remember getting kind of mad. I was like, hold on, why am I not allowed to write about this? Like, why do I feel like I can't write about this? Why do I feel like nobody cares? And why do I feel like I'm not allowed to write about my human experience and the human experience of so many people I love? Because it's just like so unpalatable. Oh, so weird. So and it's like, wait, I gotta do something about this.
Yeah.
And then I
You
felt
do.
very overwhelmed.
Yes,
And I was like,
Mallory.
I
We're
have to
rooting
tell
for
the
you.
perfect Mormon story. And
Oh,
eventually got to what you said before. I'm sorry this was such a long-winded way of saying it, but I just need to paint with my color. And like, I hope that other people show up and paint with their colors too. The truth is that I feel like this, not just about the Mormon community, but really every outgroup that we might be creating in any moment. I think that media and storytelling's job is to redeem things that we don't understand. I really think
Yeah.
that's what we're doing. We're trying to shine light on areas that freak us out and say, me too, actually. I'm a human too. I'm also struggling with this weird thing I grew up with that I thought made me an alien. And I have high hopes for there are so many interesting Mormon creators all across the spectrum, as we've discussed. And I just say, like, keep going. Please keep making it and do it for all
yes.
of us. Like, whatever your color of the rainbow is, I want to see it,
Yeah.
Yes. I love that.
Well, and I'm not an artist or creative like you are, Mallory, but I relate to that a lot just in terms of thinking about my life and my relationships and still painting with all those colors or whatever. This all feels very relevant because today I was having a conversation with a guy that um he lives in different countries, so we haven't pursued things. But he's mentioned before, like, hey, by the way, if we were to ever pursue things, the Mormon thing would really be a problem. And today we were talking a little bit more, and I was just like kind of opening up about how I feel like a loser sometimes because of my religion, and that like
Yeah.
it's just this instant, like, people hear about it and you can watch this wall go up of like, oh, I can no longer encounter you as like a fully normal, coherent human being. There's this like weirdness that's just like this veil over you. So I was trying to explain that, and he's like, no, I think you're exaggerating. And then I keep explaining what I mean by that, and he's like, well, but that's because you believe weird things. And then I was like, okay, but do you even know what I believe, sir? Like, have you asked me a single question? And he's like, listen, I kind of don't have to. And now he's very smart. He didn't say it exactly like that, but that's kind of how it felt. And then by the end, he was just reiterating his stance. He was like, yeah, I could never date an evangelical Christian, a Muslim, or a Mormon, basically. And I was like, sir, you just confirmed what I was saying to a T.
Yeah.
But, Mallory and I were talking about this, having had these experiences where there are real social consequences. You're faced with this question of like, okay, well, I could leave. And it seems like in these situations, like it would just reduce friction, and it would give people what they want, right? Especially in a dating scenario, when something like this is a deal breaker, would just make things a lot easier. I've been in so many situations like that where if I could just agree to drop the Mormon stuff, it would have been a green light. And I'm like, what kind of person would I be if I did that? And it's not even about like I'm a pretty open-minded person, and I don't feel like I have a dogmatic approach to my faith at all. Sometimes I should probably be more decisive, and maybe a little bit more so, if anything. But I guess one thing that I do feel really insistent about is like, I don't feel like I should have to deny or just cancel out a whole facet of what has shaped my soul.
Mhm.
Just because you don't have an imagination big enough
Mhm.
to take
Mm.
me as a legitimate human being, it feels like a crisis of imagination. And our imagination for each other's world is really profoundly shaped by what people consume in media and social media. And yeah, it is so crazy how loud the stuff about Mormonism is.
We are having a moment where I feel like we're being presented with some potentially more palatable options, especially of Mormon women. We see something like Ballerina Farm, and it's like, here's an option: be an absolute domestic goddess and like run a household that would make anybody in any culture, any religion jealous. And then there's also something like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, which is like almost leave. Don't do the uncool parts of the church stuff and definitely be so beautiful and sexy. I'm like, these are not great options for women. So I would love to see representations that made people feel like, oh, I saw that thing. And maybe you're that kind of Mormon. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I'm currently not able to point to a thing and say, I'm like that kind of Mormon, you know? So I'm hoping that that's what we can get from more variety, because at the moment I feel like what I feel like I'm getting from people is like, oh, okay, so you grew up Mormon. When did you leave? And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, so it's not that I've left. I'm very open-minded, and I would love to talk to you about any of this, and we could collaborate on a future. I'm willing to I'm willing to make concessions. I'm willing to have conversations, but it's actually no, there's no, like you said, there's no imagination for that at the current moment. It's acceptable if you've given it up.
Yeah.
Or if you like are fitting that other like acceptable Mormon woman mold, which is the nuclear family goddess mold, which actually most women probably don't fit into. But Rebbie, I want to know your thoughts about that.
No, I'm thinking about Brandon Flowers.
Right.
And the best thing that could happen to us is for there to be more Brandon Flowerses, right? Like he's my favorite. He's the ultimate Mormon in media to me because he just does his thing so excellently.
Yeah.
There's no one on the planet or close to, right, that doesn't know who he is and see him as a true artist. And he happens to be Mormon still. And he might be the only one, right? But he's not. He's just the most visible one, right? So I think part of it too is like, how do we shine a light on more creators who aren't creating stuff that is
Yeah.
Mormon specific, but like the composer for Heretic is a member of the church. I guess just what is still interesting to me is that we are everywhere and nowhere. And but I also think that like what you guys are doing and what I am not doing anymore as a Mormon mom living in the suburbs of Utah is being a normal, smart Mormon outside of this bubble. And that's something that I feel like maybe we should just like disband Utah and make all of us leave. And would that do it, right? How much of an impact would that have? Because I think that some of the shock or some of the response that you guys are getting when someone finds out you're Mormon is like, it's discomfort, but it is also like, I'm glad that they're shocked. I mean, I'm sad,
Sure.
but it's like that was always a compliment to me. Like, oh, you're shocked. Like, yes, like I got you, right? Like I
got
right,
you.
because it was like you clearly had assumptions that were not true. And that I think like by just knowing people and having associations with people that have nothing to do with church, right? Or where you're not talking about it, you're just doing your thing and being excellent at it. And then it's just a thing about you that people can then add into the picture of you or not, I guess. The people you want to keep in your life, I think will add that in, or they don't have a big enough imagination, as you said.
Yeah. Well, one really frustrating thing that Mallory and I were talking about before this call, we always do a little check-in right before, but is how we've had several encounters with people who have mentioned like, they've been like, every single Mormon that I've met has been awesome. Like they're surprisingly cool and they're smart and they're with it. But like for some reason
It's
it
like
doesn't.
so offensive.
I know, but the other thing is like for some reason it doesn't puncture the actual stereotype. Like they
Right.
treat you like you must be a weird exception, but your people are still wackos.
Do you think it's just polygamy? Like, what can we ever do about that?
We're
it's
sorry.
it's so many things. It's so many things that I don't think we can point to a single one. We've got such a crisis, like a PR crisis happening right now.
Yes.
And it's definitely, I mean, because we're so media entrenched, it feels so, and maybe it's just because I'm like in LA and I work in media, but I'm like, this feels like insane, like a bubble that needs to explode, please, because this
Yeah.
is like wild. These are a bunch of people, and it's still just like those crazy people, huge group of people, completely misunderstood. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Can I say something that maybe we should cut?
Please. That means you should say it.
So, this is no disrespect to anyone who leaves the church, and this applies to such a small minority of the people who leave, but like there is so much capital and honestly money, social capital, literal financial capital to becoming like an ex-Mormon person who frames your whole brand around being an escapee from high demand religion.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's always something about it that just feels like you're exploiting your people. You're exploiting like the faith of your parents and your grandparents. They often look back at their former selves and make them sound so much dumber than they actually were. And it's like, I talked to you when you were active in the church and you were questioning and thoughtful and very engaged, and you were not like as dumb as you're now saying that you were back then. So they do that. There's this retroactively dumbing themselves down, painting everybody in these like really black and white caricatures. It's this whole persona that you can take on, and it sells because people love it, because people love like a cult story. And like Mormonism seems like the shiniest example of that, because, and here's the things that like should, if you're thoughtful about it, like puncture the Mormonism as a freaky cult thing. It produces really educated, thoughtful, articulate people who are good at engaging with the world and actually can be pretty media savvy, which is why as soon as they leave and they want to take on this whole project, they know how to do it, right? Like that
Yeah.
itself, the perfect translatability of it should show we're like much closer to the mainstream than you think. We've just got like weird temple practices and like whatever you want to point to that gives us these quirky like alien vibes, but we're pretty mainstream in our tastes and our education levels and like I don't know, things like that. If
One
anything, we're kind
was,
of
I mean, one was almost the president of the country.
yeah, exactly.
Like, no
Yeah.
matter how you feel about him, like, for how small we are, for him to be in that position, I don't know.
Yeah.
That says something. I can't tell you, like, there's nothing more depressing to me than seeing all of the, I left the church and now I'm talking about it and now I have 40,000 followers. Like
I
the
know.
accounts just like they have the biggest numbers and I'm just over here like toiling in my tiny little corner and it makes me sad. Maybe it shouldn't.
And it's often very vocal ex-Mormons who are consulted in these really large
Oh, yeah.
projects under the banner of heaven.
I just think this is such a human tendency. It's almost like when you break up with somebody and you've got friends who are like, oh, they sucked. Like, what were you doing with them? They were always like, I always thought you were too good for them or whatever. And you maybe spent years with this person trying and struggling to keep this relationship working and making all of this effort. And you end up just like crapping all over that previous self and being like, you're right. He was gross and I was stupid. I was so naive. What was going on with me? You know, the more like compassionate and understanding friend would say something like, I completely understand why you were with that person and you did your very best. And now you've moved on and we deal with reality moving forward. But this idea that you can just be like, I was an idiot before and now I'm smart, this like isn't possible for any of us.
Yeah.
Like you, like what you were saying before, Diana, about like you paint yourself as like this naive, brainwashed thing, but it was like, we are all brainwashed by our parents and by our cultures and by our schools. Like everyone is telling you what to think all the time. Like tell me you're not being brainwashed by Instagram and by magazines.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like you are being brainwashed. Of course you are. So regardless of whether you stay in the church, you leave the church, you like straddle the line for the rest of your life. I hope for everyone to be able to just respect these different versions of you that have always been doing the very best with what they had. And it is a little sad, but I do think the story works. But that story of like overcoming something does sell more than like
Yeah.
actually it was really complex. And
Mhm.
if I'm honest, I miss that relationship a lot of the time and my grief is really
Yeah.
complex. I think
Yep.
that story needs to be told too.
Mhm.
Like I've talked to so many ex-Mormons who are like, I don't know how to fill this piece of the whole. I still agree with my decision to have left, but there are some things I haven't been able to replicate outside of the church that I really miss. And I think that deserves talk and attention too.
Yes. I love that so much. I love so much of what you said. And just something I'm thinking about a lot is who gets to talk about Mormonism.
Hmm.
And I think it's wrong for us to say, oh, only active members of the church.
Right.
That's certainly not right.
Mm-mm.
Mhm.
But so far, I've mostly seen people who've left. That's what
Yeah.
it feels like, right?
Mhm.
It's like there's a writer where they would bring her on and say, like, a Mormon tells us about giving her first hand job. Like, these are the kind of things that
Right.
she would write.
Oh my
And
god.
it would be like, and like, I would always see her pop up. Like, a Mormon, she's the token Mormon. And she's telling one very specific story. I mean, it makes sense. Like, you can't fit that into a reel. And so
Mhm.
it's not getting, I mean, you can fit the hand job version, sorry, keep saying
Oh
hand
no,
job.
please.
But
Sexuality's
like you
welcome.
can, you can't, um, you can't fit like even in Under the Banner of Heaven where he's like having a faith crisis. I was like, a faith crisis within a marriage, like that is really compelling. But it's
Interesting.
essentially like one scene of him in his car being like, "Oh, I think I'll leave the church," and his wife's like, "You better not bear your testimony on Sunday," and then he's like, and then that's it, right? But like even that, like you get married in the temple, you have this idea of who you're going to be. Like you see people change in relationships and that causes divorce all the time, right? But what does it mean if you still love each other but that part of it changes where that was a foundation of the marriage?
Mhm.
That's fascinating, right?
It
That
Mm.
is.
is fascinating. And it's not, yeah, I don't know if there's a way. This is what it often comes down to for me. And sorry again, sometime at some point we'll start talking about Stephanie Meyer and Twilight. But oh no, I lost my train of thought. What did I just say? I said something about,
Faith crisis in marriage. It's very compelling, but for
yeah.
some reason
Oh,
people don't depict it. Yeah.
okay. I think one thing it comes down to for me is showing. So, have you guys seen movies? I'm thinking of movies. I don't know if it was like The Best 2 Years or Other Side of Heaven, some like
Hmm.
missionary movie where they
Hmm.
show a miracle that happened. It's like a healing miracle or something, and
Sure.
it falls, or like someone feeling the spirit. It falls so flat because you see Fast and the Furious where they jump through a building all the time. Like miracles
Ah,
don't, right? Like there's no, like
Hmm.
that's
They
interesting,
don't
Rebbie.
translate to television.
I don't think they do. And that's why I'm like, I feel like
Huh.
I've had like phases of my testimony where
Wow.
I've been like really trying to work it out on Twitter. And then I'm like, this is not where this happens. You
Mm.
cannot put it into words. Even working on like church campaigns,
Interesting.
I'm like, I don't know how to put this into words. I can try, I can get close to it, but like, I don't know how to show it in a way that doesn't feel
Hmm.
so affected or disingenuous, right? And so I think you can, you can show how it impacts things, but like that moment of like that feeling of transcendence or like something that feels like a miracle, I just don't think, I think it is so personal and maybe just so like sacred that it's like
Yeah.
not meant to be captured in that way. I don't know.
Oh my gosh, I love this take. This I think this is so interesting. I have like an adjacent theory slash question that I've had for a long time. One of my favorite movies about like the religious experience is Silence, Martin Scorsese's movie about
I loved that movie. I loved it.
yeah.
Sorry, keep going.
Well, and we're talking about one of the most seasoned, experienced directors on the planet. Like when it comes to like storytelling in the visual medium, that's that like you would be that's the man you would pay to try and get the most elite training of all time, right? And I do think that some of what we struggle with as a community, because we have sort of a tendency toward an aversion to media, and therefore people going into media, we have a little bit of a dearth of I won't say talent, I will say experience though. Like,
Yes.
how are you supposed to tell a Martin Scorsese level story about a miracle if you only get the funding to make one movie and you don't get to experience like tons of really talented filmmakers around you giving you advice and helping you move forward? And like, that man has developed into a storyteller who can talk about Christ and faith and his love of God and the complicated situation of being a faithful person whose prayers never feel answered. That's what Silence is about, right? And like, that's some of what we're dealing with here too. But I was going to ask you, like, why don't you think more active people are talking the way the ex-Mormons are talking? Do you think it's because people are afraid? Is my question.
You mean why more active Mormons aren't as openly sharing about stuff? Yeah, I mean, I think partly it's what you're saying. I think, and this also goes, sorry, I'm having two thoughts. So one is that to have the type of life that Martin Scorsese had, you're not living as a mom in the suburbs of Utah.
Sure.
So
Sure.
demographically, like we're just not setting up our people to be in LA, frankly, right?
Yeah.
Um,
It's been a mismatch
and
for me, that's for sure.
yes, I
I'm doing
relate.
I'm
I
doing
was
it. I'm
there for a
having
long
fun, but
time.
you know. Whew,
Yes.
it's been tricky.
Um, in some cases, I think we're like too rational. Like we don't want to tell those stories because we want to keep them for ourselves or we want to talk about them in therapy or whatever, right? And I do think that art is a way of processing. And I do think that like I would hope that um, I had a conversation with Nylan McBain a couple episodes ago, and she's talking about how she's so sad about this
Love
loss of
her.
like pageants and things that have gone away that like I'm like, oh yeah, those were embarrassing. That's probably good. But she's like, I feel like it is so sad to take that artistry away, right? To take those opportunities away because it limits members' exposure to the arts. And I think it is like I want them to at least have the opportunity to talk about it. And I don't know that we have those opportunities right now. But like McKay Coppins is another great example. So he's a writer for The
Yeah,
Atlantic,
he's amazing.
right? He's like a member of the church, but he's not always writing about church things. But whenever there is a church thing, he covers it. And like just seeing him in his role, I'm like, that is so incredible to be able to have someone who gets it, but can talk about it from a professional standpoint, right? Like he has the training as a journalist to do that job. And it's just so rare. I think I said this recently on Instagram, but like I want one of him at every media publication, and then I think it would be solved. But
For sure.
we're not there yet. So
Yeah, his piece about Under the Banner of Heaven was honestly
Was
so
really
helpful
great.
to me as a person and as a creator too. As I was like trying to
mm,
write and create things, I was like, this is actually great. I'm going to send it to this
Mhm.
producer or to this person I'm talking to, and been really grateful for him.
yeah, he's incredible.
I just one last thought really quick on that point. There are just like distinct ways of talking that I feel like we're trained in. Like Mallory and I struggled with this when we were starting this podcast is like, do we have to be like bearing our testimonies? Like we both feel like we've had really powerful encounters with God, with humanity, with the universe here, but like we don't talk that way anymore. That's just
Right.
not really our cadence. We don't talk like we're missionaries. Like the things that get me to stick around are not the things that like I was taught to say when they're like, here are the different factors of a testimony. And like, anyway, I think that's a big piece too. I think in the church from the active side, we should, yeah, definitely encourage a broader range of expression because I think people experience profound faith in ways that like don't find expression necessarily in regular Mormon ways of speaking too. That's just
And
want
we're
to say that.
so structured, streamlined. We like have it at this point of pride that like every church in the whole world is having the same Sunday school lesson.
Yes.
And right, like we see that as a point of pride, and I see
Yeah.
some usefulness for it, but I also feel like there's like the one couple in our ward who like talk about things in such a they make you realize how like rote everyone else is, how do you know what I'm saying? Like how we all sound the same. We have these certain ways of talking, and it's so refreshing when there are people who just don't do that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think that's kind of stifling to creativity too, is
Yes.
just
Homogeny.
homogeneity. Yeah. Homogeny? What's the word? You know it. You know what I mean.
Yes. Yeah.
Homogeneous.
I feel like if we understand what you mean, then you can make up a new
Yeah.
variation.
Thanks. Yeah.
Homogeneity.
Homogeneity. Yeah.
Totally agreed. Twilight. Where should we begin?
I have potentially a connecting thought. Here's
Yeah.
what
Amazing.
I appreciate about Twilight. I kind of wanted to come into this conversation thinking about, well, uh, we were talking on a group chat before this about maybe discussing what we feel might be uniquely Mormon influenced in Twilight. And here's what I love about that. Just given our conversation about how Mormons are aliens in the media, isn't it fun that her specific sort of Mormon fantasy of a man and sexuality and in some ways was so popular? It's like actually kind of proving our point here that it's like, no, we're all just a bunch of humans and we're driven by a lot of the same stuff. And a lot of our like weird Mormon thoughts, you actually might find them really sexy and cool. You know what I mean?
I love that take. I love that take. Like it's, and as I was thinking about this conversation, I was having the thought like two things can be true. Like it's easy and fun to poke fun at Twilight, and also
Yes.
like get it, Stephanie Meyer. We love this for you. Like I love that a woman wrote this like international phenomenon.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's I think that's the sort of timbre I feel like I'm approaching this with too, because I would not say that I was a diehard Twilight fan, and I'm not trying to sound like a cynic or anything like that. But as a writer, I have some problems with it. I have some critiques, of course. And again, not because I'm
What?
some kind of genius, but I do have notes. But I think that there's something to say for it. Kind of reminds me when people rag on Shonda Rhimes, which I know is a different situation, but it's like Shonda Rhimes has the absolute formula of like genius formula for what makes people lean forward in their seats. You can call it trash, but I call it genius, baby. She like
Yeah.
cracks into that. She cracks into that part of particularly women, but people every single time. And I think that that deserves credit. You know, and Stephanie Meyer did that with this. She like set up the tension in a situation in a way that made the whole world light on fire enough to launch the careers of multiple large actors. And it's really cool. It's interesting.
I'm curious, do you feel like you guys, well, so let's talk about like when we first read Twilight. Do you feel like it affected you differently, and how so, because you were a member of the church? Did you feel seen in it? Did you feel
Mm.
like it was more relatable to you?
I think not consciously, but I actually do think that yes, there was stuff I was picking up on. Like I'm used to like reading books and encountering like a challenge. I mean, here's another funny thing that people don't get about the experience of being Mormon, like as though you're in some bubble. Like, no, the experience of being Mormon is like you're constantly encountering friction between your world and the mainstream and constantly having to question like, why do we do it this way anyway? I don't know, you know? Because I feel like I remember all the time reading books where people were like having sex in high school um, and drinking and doing drugs and stuff like that, and just being like, well, I support this character, but that's not what I do. And I think that Twilight provided less friction with the idea of sex before marriage being one. But I think that's the obvious one that people would point to, but I think it's deeper than that. There was this sense of loyalty above all else to Edward, for example, that struck me as religious in some sense, like this
Mm-hmm.
the vows, right? And like what it
Covenant,
means to have
basically.
Yeah.
like to commit to somebody in an eternal way, all of that and the stakes of that. And you know, especially the 20th century church like really leaned hard into like beautiful eternal monogamous marriages. That's what eternity is going to look like. And so we've romanticized that picture of this the power couple, and that's all what the Cullen clan is like
Mm-hmm.
power couples of eternal monogamous unions, and they all have their superpowers and they work together and they do extra good because they're couples together or whatever. Like all of that, like, yeah, kind of provided no friction with my worldview.
Man, sidebar. There's no way these sexy vampires would be monogamous. It's insane. It's
It's insane.
insane.
Like
I do
vampires are
feel like
inherently sexual. There's
that
just the biting of the neck. I'm sorry. It's
I
not,
know.
yeah.
rewatching all of those
But these were the
scenes in
good
the
ones, right? They were vegetarian, which in
True.
yes,
Twilight world means they did not drink human blood, they only drink animal blood. So the Cullen
animal
clan
blood.
was like this was another thing that just made a lot of sense to my Mormon teenage
Mm-hmm.
brain is that like yes, there are other people who are vampires like us who have these impulses, but we practice ours in this distinct
Mm.
way. And so that kind of dynamic too was like, well, of course. you
Yeah.
know but yeah, you're right. It is weird how committed they are to each other.
Well, but it makes so much sense. Like I was so struck by it because it's been a long time since I'd seen the movie, and I reviewed it this weekend, and I was like, "This is so Mormons." Like to answer your question, Rebby, I don't think when I read it at 18, I had
Mm.
any. It wasn't really my thing, but I will admit Edward worked for me. I was like, "Oh dang!" Like I gotta flip the pages until I get to Edward's name again. I'm just gonna read all the Edward portions. I know that's what I did with New Moon. Like I was like, I am not reading anything that doesn't mention his name. Thank you very much. I'm here for Edward.
I felt that way
So,
too.
so when you guys read it, I'm curious about this because I was talking to my sister-in-law who said like she was watching it with her 15-year-old daughter and her friends, and they were like, "Oh, he's just so toxic." And like their relationship, they're
Hmm.
codependent and like saying all
Hmm.
these things that like we're not things, or we were not talking about them when it
In
was
the
No,
our
2000s.
age, right?
in
Yes.
2008, you
Codependent.
know.
Yeah. And it's like funny to me and like silly that 15-year-olds now are talking about that. I'm not sure they totally know what that means, but I think
Hmm.
we've moved hopefully in the right direction. But I am curious, yeah, if you guys felt like um, how you responded to the soulmate aspect of Edward. Because I feel like I read these, I think I read them at I know I read one of them while working at a call center and like having conversations while reading because my job was so mindless in the summers and like um reading them like thinking I was making fun of them but also like
Totally, Rebby. Totally.
devouring them.
Slightly.
Yeah, totally. That was my experience as well. I was like, why are you reading this all night then, Mallory, if you think it's so bad?
Totally.
Perhaps
And
there's
did we
something
Me
that you're not
too. I
admitting.
was also a
yes.
secret lover who feigned being a hater in public.
So is this what everyone was doing or did I don't know. I'm curious why
Yeah.
we did that or if like it was performative then and we actually did love Edward or if we knew it's just a page turner, right? And like I
Yeah.
still will any like soulmate type of romance. Well, I'm curious now. Do you guys engage with things differently now? Because so what's the
Mm.
movie I watched? Have you read the Jenny Han's To All the
Oh,
Boys I've
yes.
Loved Before?
I haven't read them, but I saw the
So
movies.
okay, first movie's amazing, second two movies are not great, but the books are all phenomenal.
Hmm.
I read the books after I did the movies, and they're so great. It's better than Summer I Turned Pretty.
Mm.
Everyone must read them. But I watched the third movie. It's essentially about high school romance. The third movie is them like leaving for college, and I watched it with a girl who I had like gone to college with. We'd known each other for a decade plus, right? And the whole time, it like the sorry, I'm gonna spoil it. It's like the idea is that they're gonna stay together after college, and like they're gonna be high school sweethearts, and that romance is gonna last forever. And we were sitting there like, no, we're like, break up with him. Like, we're like, go to college. And then we're like, what does this mean? Like, are we dead inside? Is there no romance? Like, what are we supposed to feel with this? And I'm curious, I haven't read it since my most recent exposure to Twilight is watching it with my husband who had never seen it, which was the most fun thing. Just like watching his face and like the shock. But I'm curious if I would perceive it differently now than I did when I was young.
I
Yeah.
I feel like I can't know the difference between me being in the more Diana and I talk about this, how like the mothering phase of your life doesn't necessarily include biological children, that moving
Mhm.
into a phase of more feminine wisdom is something that benefits the world, regardless of whether or not
I
you have
love
a
that.
nuclear family to support. And so I don't know if it's just that I'm in that sort of phase of my life where I'm like I have things to offer and and things that I want to be generous with, and people I'd like to take care of, and that sort of thing. Or if it's more of what you were saying before about the vernacular and what we've talked about when it comes to relationships and toxicity since. But I definitely reviewed the movie thinking like, okay, listen, 1000% Jacob, 1000% date the guy who's like a family man and you're like
A
connected and makes
friend.
you laugh. Like, don't date the guy who you have this like insane physical connection with, but is actually quite dull. Like, for the most part,
And
quite
dead.
boring.
He's dead.
He's actually dead, and
Also
you have
dead.
to retreat from your entire life and sort of watch everyone you love die to be with this person. There's like
Yeah.
almost nothing about it that I would want for my niece, for example. I'm like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
please date the man that will connect you to the world, not the opposite, you know?
Yep.
Do you think that that is like Mormon toxicity? Is that a phrase? Like
Mm,
eternal companions taken to the extreme. Do you think that we can,
Yeah.
like, that's reductive or maybe not? Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like,
yes.
is the Bella Edward relationship the bad example of Mormons being obsessed with this idea of an eternal companion?
I'll jump in here, maybe be a little bit of a devil's advocate. Like, I mean, yes, I absolutely agree. Like, Jacob makes all the sense in the world. But why was I so drawn to Edward? There was something that was like that
It's
I like
true.
lusted after with that kind of the commitment and loyalty that they had to each other. And something
Devotion.
about Jacob was a sort of fidelity test, right? And she passed and she decided to be loyal to
Mm,
Edward. And I think that was really compelling to me, right? Because when you want to be with somebody and like
Mm,
you want a romantic future, fidelity is the ultimate sign that like this is real, right? And yes, on like a human level, I think if they were just side by side, but because we all like got wrapped up into this like really special commitment that they had to each other, I couldn't I just had dissonance, right? Because I was like, Jacob feels like the more like he makes her laugh. There's something just so pleasant and grounded about this. But like you made a commitment to Edward and your heart
mm,
is still there. And like that's where your deeper values are. And so like I found myself still team Edward while I was reading it. And I
mm.
mean, this is let me connect this to something we were saying earlier. And again, I'm not saying that the Mormon worldview here of soulmates and eternal companions and like resting so much on a relationship is like good. Obviously, the reason we have the soloist is because it's gone too far in many ways. But
reel it in.
here's a case that I would make for it is like um there's something beautiful about like obsessive commitment to something, anything, right? And like
Mm,
so much that it can like become like a sort of a vision of its own that like creates a world, and it's not just about being controlled or whatever. And there's all sorts of stuff about like feminist critiques of Twilight will be like, well, and what's so annoying is that Bella was complicit in Edward's patriarchy. And it's like, yeah, it was. She was making her own commitments too. And so, yes, it's like silly and over the top, but like those are some of the things that make life beautiful, I think, are like obsessive, unconditional commitment to something just because you love it and because you committed to it.
Rebby, I like your question of whether or not Bella and Edward could potentially be seen as the idea of an eternal companion taken too far. I think that multiple papers could be written in multiple directions on it. You know what I mean?
yes.
Because I love what you're saying, Diana, about commitment and how that's such a beautiful thing. And that's sort of like saying no to other options is a part of what makes the life we choose so special. But I do think the idea of a single person meeting all of your needs and just that isolationist sort of element of
Yeah,
Twilight
very
is
isolating.
I do
Yes.
think that that is a thing that, I mean, it's not just true in Mormonism. I just think it's heightened because of the eternal nature of our marriages that we talk about eternal companions. And I don't think it makes dating easier either. The idea that it's like, well, this is for eternity. And so this idea that it's like, I'm going to be locked in life forever and we're going to be almost
Yeah.
like feel like we're all alone, just the two of us against the world. I think you might be onto something with that. That there's something there.
Okay, and that's
Yeah,
making
I
me
like
think
that.
of like, did you ever have um at BYU? Dan, did you go to BYU?
Mhm.
You did. Okay. At BYU, like married male classmates who like wouldn't talk to you or like wouldn't like
Oh
work
yeah.
with you
Yeah.
because that's how committed they are to their wife. And I'm like, don't flatter yourself, first of all. Like,
That is
no, but
so
like,
real.
but seriously, you hear of that. I was just reading about something how like Silicon Slopes is like this is a real problem. Like they're trying to elevate women in tech in Utah, but it's hard because of this culture that it's like in our desire to be, which is a good desire, right? To be faithful, we end up being isolated. Like
Yeah.
you can talk to a
Hmm.
woman, it's going to be
Yeah.
okay, right? And I just yeah, I feel like I have seen that in and it's all anecdotal, right? But like I think that is one way where that isolation does go too far. Also the idea of like I was thinking about this the other day. One of my best friends got married. She's at like pretty early, pretty young, like 19 or 20. She dated the guy forever. She'd known him her whole life. Anyway, she like did not want to get married because she's like, no, I want to, do all the things. But she was obviously going to marry him. She married him, and we like stopped hanging out. We like didn't hang out for all of college, and we would sometimes at like girls' nights or whatever. But I'm like, that is so weird. I just had this thought the other day for some reason. 15 years ago, why did I stop hanging out with my best friend?
Yeah.
Because she was married. This is weird.
Yeah.
I don't
Yep.
know if it's unique to Mormonism, and maybe it's better to be on that extreme than like the other extreme of like
Flirtatious man in the office.
yes. Because
Yeah.
I've like watched that happen, like, affairs happen with people I'm working with, and that's also
Sure.
not cute. But
Right.
I feel like there's some middle ground there. There's got to be.
It's
Yeah.
tough. Yeah, because I've seen both extremes too, and it always makes you sick when it's like, this person's living a total double life from their family, and so that's a part of me
Mhm.
that always wants to stick up for, honestly, like the Mike Pence culture of like obviously like dweebish and weird, but like also it just I don't know. I do understand. There is something honest about acknowledging that fidelity and commitment comes with costs. And so I think in that sense, I respect people who are willing to bear that. But to be honest, how about the cost of like, I can talk to this woman, I can recognize she's attractive, and I don't have to act on that. And I don't have to
Exactly.
indulge that. Like, I think you're right. There should totally be a middle ground. It's just to say I'm sympathetic with like they're experiencing some kind of sexual insecurity or anxiety. I respect the impulse to want to be very faithful, but yeah, I think be brave. You got this,
But and
sir.
because who's the cost? Is the cost the
Yes.
female
Yes.
employee
Yep,
that doesn't play basketball with all the dudes
that's
at
not the
church?
right
So at
cost.
least
Exactly.
Right.
in
It's
Utah, right? And
yeah.
again, I agree that erring on the side of fidelity is better, but I just it is an interesting side effect of
Yes.
our obsession. Is that too strong of a word? With straight marriage.
Yeah.
I remember this. Do you guys remember hearing that Stephanie Meyer has said that the idea for Twilight came to her in a dream? Was this a vision? I think we should debate. Wrong answers only. But I'm being serious. Like,
That is the best.
Yes. Yes.
right? I think
I
it
think
is.
I think it is because part of what's weird about, Mormonism too is like this should also be cut. I shouldn't say this, but like there's always going to be a part of us that's like, are we just crazy? Or like, is this legit?
Yeah.
And I think that precisely the magic of it is like kind of having this edge of knowing like I'm following this because it's like delicious, not just because I know for certain that like, but there's something delicious about pursuing this
Mm.
path or this world or like whatever. And I feel like Joseph Smith had that kind of like um just that kind of passional energy there in terms of like his imagination and the kinds of things that he was open to. And Stephanie Meyer, totally feel that in her. I think she's a freak in other ways. I don't like super relate to her. But I kind of she feels like gutsy and weird in ways that I respect. So yeah.
Yeah. My brain immediately goes to like, well, what's a vision? You know, because I
Yeah,
really feel like, do we just call it a vision when it comes to fruition somehow and everything else is dreams and nonsense? You know what I mean? It's
interesting.
like, because it came to fruition, it's like, kind of seems like it definitely was. It definitely was a vision, you know? But I have, not to be immediately so personal, but I have some things that have felt like almost visions that have not happened. And so there's a part of me that's like,
Mm.
I feel the way Diana does, where I'm like, I might be crazy. I might be crazy. Is that just like a daydream? Or is that going to happen to me? I don't know.
Mm.
And I love that about
Mm.
faith, spirituality, religion in general. I love that middle ground, ambiguity, uncertainty place of magic.
Mm.
That's what keeps
Yeah.
me. That's what keeps my butt in the seat. A lot of the time, it's just straight up magic. So yeah, I'm gonna also be pro vision.
Okay, I am provision for two reasons. One, just to add to what you're saying, the magic element of it.
Hmm.
Sometimes, okay, and not to get too much into the temple. I never like this is like a conversation I would have differently among a person offline. But just okay, I've been thinking about temples because anyway, temples are tricky and can be confusing. But I have recently been thinking about like how cool would it be if we could just own that like this is nuts. You go into a place and we actually believe that like it is otherworldly. That like
Hmm.
there is a physical space you can go to. That's like the same as a monastery, right? Or like
Hmm.
a place of meditation. Like I I kind of think sometimes we shy away from the mystical aspects of Mormonism, but like Joseph Smith, how much weirder does it get? I never feel more insane than when I'm remembering that I believe the Joseph Smith story. Like when I am like re-encountering it and like, oh yes, yep, that's the thing I claim, right? But why are we so afraid of it? Like that is what started the religion. That is what like you see this push now for like spirituality, right? And you see us all wanting to escape through media, but like why can the escape not be through
Mm.
church? Like church is not a cool word anymore, but like we have that. Like, and I know that not everyone feels the spirit, like the warm, fuzzy, transcendent spirit that the burning in the bosom that we like to talk about. But why else would we still be here? Why else would we be interested in this if there wasn't some element of magic to it?
Hmm.
I
There
I'm
is
like,
magic. Yeah.
Yeah.
there is magic to it, and why do we not want to admit it? This just the second thought is that like in my just as a writer and creative person, like the creative process for me and getting revelation are essentially the same. I don't know if it's the same for you, Mallory, but it's
Yeah.
like even like
Absolutely.
writing ad campaigns for chips or whatever, not holy, but it's like, okay, think about it, research it, think all the thoughts, try it, try the other things. And then like pray, and then an idea comes out of nowhere, and that's the one, right? Like
Hmm.
I just feel like creativity, and I think that sometimes we do humans a disservice by thinking that only some people are creative types. I think
100%.
that we
Yeah.
are divine and creativity is in all of us. And I think that creativity is all creativity to me is divine. So yeah, she had a vision. Edward came
Yeah.
to us
Had
in
a
a vision.
vision.
I love that so much, Rebbie. I completely agree. I think that really making anything, creating anything, a conversation, a relationship, a trip, like living is creative. Living is
Mm-hmm.
creativity. And that's part of the reason that I felt as I've engaged more with like creating art and various types of and really strengthening that muscle of recognizing when something like it's almost like it feels like me. It's a weird thing to be like,
Mm-hmm.
as you get, one of the coolest things about getting older as an artist is I think that your voice gets more defined and you start to actually like recognize when you're like, I gotta say that. I don't care about this. I gotta say that though, or I gotta do this. And I think we're all doing that. I think we're all doing that as like creators of our lives. I just love that
Yeah.
point.
I think that's the point, just kind of tying the bow on what we were talking about earlier. Like, yeah, there's super weird stuff about our church and it's like super institutional, especially from the outside, and it can look so controlling. But like, it really does empower that kind of like individual discernment and magic making in your own life. And to be clear, we're not talking about like Wiccan style magic. We're just talking about like,
Mm-hmm.
I think we're talking about creating beauty and meaning and like
Unknown,
connection and
you
like
know,
being
like
real
humility.
creatives in how you live, right? And like
Mm.
working with life like it's a, I don't know, an artist's palette. But like I feel like that really is core to my faith, is like it's taught me to engage life in a way that is so compelling and like that I believe in. I believe in that process. And
Mm.
I guess one of the crazy things about a vision is like you really kind of don't know where it's going to lead, but it's a way of doing life. And and sometimes it leads you, you start with Twilight, you get 50 Shades of Gray. And
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes you get crazy things by following those. But
It
yeah.
reminds me of there was a conversation that Tim and Aubrey from Faith Matters had with Richard Bushman, who wrote Rough Stone Rolling, and he talks about how embarrassing the gold plates are. I think I'm
Yeah.
such a
That's
fan of this
So
amazing.
conversation.
embarrassing.
He's like, it just reminded me of what you were saying about the Joseph Smith story, Rebby, and like just how much it feels like this whole conversation is surrounding this sort of thing about how what we believe is so embarrassing. But he was like, here's why you can't lose the gold plates. The gold plates imply that we believe in an enchanted universe where an angel can come down and bring a 14-year-old boy, or talk about bringing a 14-year-old boy some gold plates, and it can change, it can create a worldwide church. And it's like that in itself is a nugget that we should be like reflexive. I mean, I guess just circularly proud of, at the very least, that when you come all the way around the circle from like, wow, this is really embarrassing, that couldn't possibly true, do we really believe this, wait a second, that's actually kind of, I was gonna say badass,
Yeah.
what's a better word? It's like, it's actually kind of exciting. And
Yeah.
I do
Hold.
hope that that's something that we as like Mormon artists, again, all across the spectrum of Mormonism and Mormon experiences, can be bringing to the table, is that belief in enchantment and how
Mm.
magical that makes our creativity in the world. I look forward to what I hope is an era of Mormon art that's coming. Like,
I
I
love that.
believe in
Mm.
that wave. I hope it's happening.
Yes. Okay,
I
and
love that
okay, to
too.
continue the metaphor, if Stephanie Myers is the embarrassing, if Twilight is the embarrassing gold plates,
Okay, yeah,
what did
yeah.
she do? What did she do for so many other
Uh-huh.
LDS fantasy authors? Maybe she didn't, I don't know if she opened the door for Brandon Sanderson, but
Mm.
like there are a lot of like most of our well-known authors are in fantasy. And I
Mm-hmm.
have to think that some of it
True.
is like the halo effect from Stephanie. I have to
Interesting.
think. I don't know. I don't have any factual evidence to back that up, but
Well,
I
even
would
just the
be
fact that we have so many
curious.
fantasy artists, that alone is like, yeah, bunch of magical people who love magical
Yeah.
worlds and are good
Yeah.
at writing characters who are, I mean, talking about the Cullens and how Mormon their situation is. It's in part because we so relate to characters that don't fit in the broader culture and are doing something weird that people don't understand, and people are looking at them funny, and they're kind of outcast in a certain way. And it's like, hello, Mormons are primed to tell the best stories ever.
Truly.
I I'm becoming prouder and prouder of that element, that it's like, you think I
Mhm.
come from somewhere weird? Well, listen to this story.
Buckle up. I'm curious, Mallory, we talked about this a little before we jumped on the call, but so a couple years ago, there was this book called Corinne that was
Hmm.
written by an artist that, like, it says on the book jacket, it's a pen name for a New York Times bestselling author, which I'm like, guys, you really were not trying to hide this well enough. But it is, people have assumed that it's written by Stephanie Meyer, and I don't know if it is. I've read some things that look like it disproves that it is, but I'm interested in the assumption because the book, and I haven't read the book, but my basic I know that it involves a woman leading a high demand, like fundamentalist kind of faith. And I'm just curious if we feel bad for Stephanie that she can never leave her Mormonism behind. Like,
Mm.
because I'm curious, Mallory, with the stuff you're writing, like, because I've had that same thought, like, I just want to write something that has nothing to do with
Yeah.
Mormonism. And then other times I'm like, but why? You
Hmm.
write what you know, right? But like, I don't know. I I feel like it is a fact that Mormon creators get tethered to Mormonism. And I just think that's interesting and maybe unfair.
Yeah, I do think it's a heavy weight to carry. I think it's a lot of weight to put on your tender creative efforts, especially at the beginning of something. I just I just finished Rick Rubin's book. I love him. He's such a guru. I'm
Yes.
so obsessed, and he talks about how essentially there's art and then there's commerce. And commerce comes in when you're trying to please someone else, which of course we have to
Mm,
do. Like we have to work for clients, you know, we have to be worried about our demographics. We have to worry about our brand sometimes. And he's like, great, that's commerce. It's not art. And
mm,
I guess my hope for what I'm putting out there, the wave of Mormon artists that I am like, I'm like battle crying for all of you right now. Um, but my hope would be that in order to make your art, you have to be honest. You have to be honest. You have to do what's interesting to you. And my hope is that we'll free each other from the kinds of expectations that are really holding us back from being honest and genuine and really getting at what's itchy and making us curious and lighting us up and getting us excited. It's like, oh, we got to go straight for it, or else we're
mm,
just making commerce with almost no audience. Sometimes it's like if you're afraid of your church community and that's why you're not making your art, or if you're afraid of not being cool and that's why you're saying it this way, it's like, well, both directions can force you into a
mm.
place of commerce instead of art. And what we're looking for is the real deal, baby. Like, let's make some art, and it's going to be terrifying, and that's what makes it fun.
I
But
love that so much.
yeah,
Go ahead.
I
Sorry.
have a thought on that too. But Mallory, I know, do you have to run?
I do need
Okay.
to run, so I don't know what's the best way to wrap things up, but I would love to hear your thought.
Okay, I'll be quick and then I guess we can wrap things up. But I was just going to say, you know, as much as I can think about this question with my dating life, like I've been asked the question many times on dates with non-members or whatever, like, wait, but you're okay with dating outside the church or whatever? And I know, you know, that's not something I would have like imagined for myself when I was 16 or whatever. But first of all, yeah, I am. And second, like, I don't get the people, I like really do feel like a normal human being who can do normal human things with people.
Hmm.
And like, I think that there's some way in which like family creation or like partnership formation, I think mirrors like the artistic creation of like a novel or a work of art or whatever, in the sense that people are like, okay, but is it a Mormon work of art? Is it a Mormon marriage or partnership? Or is it
Yes.
just a work of art or a partnership or whatever? And like, I very
Totally.
much think, I think I'm always trying to make the case, like, I just want like a functional relationship. I like, and I don't, you know, I will,
Yes.
Mormonism will like work its way, but like, and it's in me, but like, I feel like it also gives me lots of skills that will could just help you build a normal relationship. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just, anyway, I feel like I face that question as you're thinking about creating a life with somebody.
Mm,
So I do think it's always a little bit, I think it's, yeah, to Mallory's point, we want to make it art when we talk
yeah.
about Mormonism, to be able to like really talk about it, not have it be a
Mm.
caricature. And I do think it's like an insult when it's pigeonholed as Mormon stuff. So that's,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I I love that so much, Diana. Earlier, we were on a phone call before we got on this one where I was expressing feeling like an alien to Diana. And one of the things she says to me sometimes that I love so much is she said, "You belong to the world, Mallory." And I was like, that's right. I
Yes,
think that
you do.
sometimes what we're talking about here is just being able to claim our dignity. We deserve to have dignity. Our lives deserve to be portrayed in dignified ways. And that's portray makes it sound like it's some kind of performance. But I just we if other people don't see it, that's fine, but I do think we need to see it. We need to be able to
Yeah.
see that we have dignity, our lives
Yeah.
have dignity, for sure.
Yes. I love
Amen.
it.
Oh,
Okay, you two dignified ladies, I
woo.
think we need to wrap it up for
Could go
tonight.
forever.
I'm
Thank you,
obsessed.
Mallory, for
We need
staying
a
a little
part
bit longer.
two.
This was so fun. This was one of my favorite
Yes.
conversations we've ever
So fun.
had.
Ever. I
Yeah.
we got
Yeah.
into so much meaty goodness. Rebby, thank you so much for your time, and please come
Oh my
back
gosh.
soon.
Thank you
Yes.
for doing this. You guys are, I just am the biggest fan of each of you individually.
so
Let's do it again. I'm
mutual.
gonna go make a
Thank
list
you.
of like all the ideas I have,
Yes.
other things
I know
wanna
we
talk to you
hardly
about.
even, we should make this regular. This was really good.
Yeah, I
would
loved
love
it. I loved it.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Thank you everyone for listening. If you want to continue the conversation with us, we've got a couple of options for you. You're welcome to email us with any feedback or topic suggestions at hello@thesoloists.org. You can also follow us on Instagram. Our account handle is the.soloists. And if you're not on Instagram, don't let us give you FOMO. Enjoy being unplugged from social media. Thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.